All right. Hello. How are you? My name is Tennie, and I am coming to you from Federal Job Results. And this evening, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about cracking the federal job code. This presentation is proudly brought to you by Federal Job Results. You'll see our website at the bottom of the first slide. You'll also see some contact information at the very end. So no, I've got the introduction. Thanks. I have been in the HR field for over 25 years. I've also served in the federal government, in the corporate, and the nonprofit world with HR. Tonight, we are going to spend the majority of our time talking about federal, and do know that the chat box is open. So if you have any questions or thoughts, don't hesitate to put them in the box, and I'll be certain to keep an eye on the box and answer those questions as they come up. Most people will join our webinars when they're in kind of a couple of situations. One, they may already be in the federal government and maybe just looking at a way to progress, to get a promotion, or to look for a new opportunity in the government. Or you may be in a situation where you're coming to us this evening because you just have kind of a curiosity about the federal government and how the hiring process works, because you might have heard a lot of stories about how difficult it is to get into the federal government. And the last category of people that come into our webinars usually will come in because they're just so doggone frustrated that they've put in applications, they feel like they've put in good resumes for federal jobs, and they're just going nowhere with them. So we hope that no matter what situation you're in this evening, joining us and spending some time with us, just kind of refreshing some information, or for some, maybe new information on how to get into the federal government, will be helpful to you. Okay? All right, so let's get started. This evening, we're really going to cover three things. We're going to look at the federal roadmap. In other words, what goes on behind the magic curtain of the submit button. So many times we have people that come to us and say, you know what, I hit that submit button maybe at 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the package is due, and I think I did it. I did my best, right? And we kind of cross fingers and toes and hope the very best. Hi, Mike. Nice to see you. So we want to talk a little bit about what happens behind that magic curtain, because I think if you understand the hiring process, it helps you build a stronger federal package. Then we're going to break down some pieces of the puzzle. And by that, we mean, how do we know what to qualify in the federal government? What is it organized like? How do I know even how to read those announcements? Because those announcements sometimes can be pretty hefty and pretty wordy. So we kind of want to break that down and just kind of make that kind of bite-sized bites tonight to kind of understand and kind of process. And then lastly, I promise we'll spend a few minutes talking about the difference between a federal and a private resume. And for a lot of people, this is the first uh-oh if you've been applying for federal positions and kind of getting nowhere. A lot of people don't know there's two different animals when you talk about private and federal resume. A private sector resume on average is 2 pages long, and it's a 5-star, rock star, out of the park, quality 2-page document that talks about you, your accomplishments, your results, and how you move the needle and how you helped an organization. But a federal resume is very different. A federal resume on average is 5 pages. And it's much more in depth about not only your accomplishments and your results, but your skill set and how you do it. And for a lot of people, that is usually the first myth buster, is that you cannot use a private sector resume for a federal opportunity. And we'll talk about at the end the differences, but I think as we go through this discussion, you'll definitely see why they're such different animals. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the hiring process. Most people know that the majority of federal opportunities are found on usajobs.gov. Notice I say the majority, because not all federal jobs are listed on USA Jobs. There are some agencies that have exceptions from OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, and don't need to advertise on USA Jobs. That right there should be an indication that, maybe if I look at agencies that are not on USA Jobs, I might get a better opportunity chance, because USA Jobs obviously is very busy. It's got over 10,000 opportunities on it daily, and there's a lot of foot traffic and a lot of candidates that go that way. So you can take a look at our website, and under resources, you'll see a list of federal agencies that are not listed on usajobs.gov. I encourage you to take a look at that take a look at that list of agencies, there we go, and see if those are agencies that you might be attracted to. Always encourage people to look at agencies not just as a place for a job or a career start or a career move, but make sure that an agency kind of speaks to you, right? That it's something that you feel strongly in, just like you would do with any opportunity in the civilian sector. You want to deep dive on that agency. You want to understand their mission, their culture, understand where they are and what they're going for. That way, when you apply for them, you can speak to them. I often say that federal agencies are kind of like family members, right? You've got your conservative aunt, you've got your crazy cousin. They're all different in their own ways with their own mission, their own operation beat, and it's always a good idea to check those out. GAO might be one because it is considered, yes, that is very true, Mark. GAO, you're right. Okay, so, but most people will go to usajobs.gov to hit the old submit bar. So let's talk about what happens after you hit the submit button. I was a guest facilitator on a webinar a few months ago, and we took questions from the audience to start off that evening. And the first question that came to me that night was, is usajobs.gov where dreams go to die? I was kind of taken back by that question. So many people get frustrated when they apply for federal jobs because they just don't understand, again, what happens behind that magic curtain. It's kind of like Wizard of Oz kind of stuff. So let's break this down for you. So the first thing to kind of myth bust is that the federal government, the usajobs.gov, does not use applicant tracking systems. So a lot of people think that when you hit the submit bar, that all of a sudden your application never sees a human being. It just kind of goes through all of these algorithms and computers and it comes out. No, that's not true. In fact, in the application process, there is only one piece of the application process that's actually evaluated and graded by a computer, and that is the self-assessment questionnaire. If you are familiar with federal hiring and you've gone into USA Jobs and even done some shopping around and looked at announcements, you'll know what I mean by that self-assessment questionnaire. Way back in the day, probably before most of you were looking at employment, but definitely when I came in, the OPMs used to do KSA essays where you had to write essays for every KSA on a job announcement. Anybody remember those? Oh my gosh, they were horrible. And your federal application package could easily be 10, 15, 20 plus pages because you had to write essays for every KSA, every knowledge, skill, and ability competency. Well, a few years ago, and it's been a while now, but they've done away with KSA essays, and now they ask applicants to self-assess, self-rank themselves on competencies. Interesting to note that on most of the announcements, if you go to the third part of the announcement on the how you'll be evaluated section, you will find a preview link to the self-assessment questionnaire. To me, that's like seeing the test before the test day. You get to see the assessment before you actually apply for the position. This can be helpful in so many ways. One, it helps give you a good sense of what that position is going to be about. Not only do you get to read the announcement, but now you get to look at the self-assessment and take it seriously and honestly. If you're struggling in answering some of those questions on that self-assessment questionnaire, it probably is not going to be a good fit for you. It's probably not the right position for you to spend some time in building a package for. But if you go through that self-assessment, you think this is a pretty good opportunity for you, then I want you to think about this. If the agency has thought enough of that concept or that skill or that experience to include it in the self-assessment questionnaire, that serves as a good checklist to make sure that's included in your federal resume. So a lot of times the self-assessment questionnaire can kind of help you out on building that federal resume, which we'll talk about in a bit. The self-assessment questionnaire, usually radio dial buttons, right? You're gonna rate yourself on certain assessments or maybe short essays, but it's gonna be, and I'm being a little fun this evening, but maybe they're gonna ask about your analytical skills, right? And the options are, I am everything about analytical skills. I'm pretty good at analytical skills. With supervision, I'm okay with analytical skills. Yeah, I know a little bit about analytical skills. What's analytical skills? So you have an opportunity to rate yourself. This is the time to be bold and to be brave and to give yourself as much credit as possible, with obviously being honest. As human beings, human nature is we usually don't give ourselves enough credit. So make sure that as you do the self-assessment questionnaire, you kind of pause and you really think about it. Don't go with that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, well, yeah, I do it. It's just my job. Let me go to the next one. Put some thought into it. And that's why using the self-assessment questionnaire preview can be really helpful, so that you can really think about how good you are at something. And yes, then that comes out as a numeric value as the computer calculates that up. That is the only part of the federal application package that's actually evaluated by a computer. Your federal resume is actually reviewed by OPM HR eyeballs, real human beings. When they look at your resume, they are looking for the keywords. They're looking for the competency level, which in most cases in federal government, they are looking at a minimum of 1 year specialized experience, meaning 12 months of that experience. That does not have to be consecutive experience, but they are looking for 12 months. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later as well. So they're looking for keywords, they're looking for that level of competence, and they're looking for qualifications. So that, along with that value of your self-assessment questionnaire, gives them an opportunity to rate you and rank you, okay? In most cases, you're gonna come out in one of three categories. You're going to come out as not qualified, qualified and not referred, or qualified and referred. So let's talk about each one of those statuses. If an applicant receives a not qualified status, it's exactly what the name means, not qualified. So that means that application package is going nowhere else. That's the end of the road for that application. We find that that happens when people maybe misread the announcement and not upload the correct documentation, like transcripts or proof of this or proof of that, or they have applied just for something that is totally not them. Not qualified means the HR just didn't see anything that was going to allow them to check off their mandate list and make that person qualified. The most common and the most frustrating status to get in a federal opportunity is qualified and not referred. What does that mean? I'm qualified, but you're not putting my package forward. That means that the HR is saying that you are qualified for the position. They see the basics, right? They see the keywords, the competencies, but they do not see enough depth on those qualifications to move that package forward to the hiring authority and the agency. So a qualified and not referred, believe it or not, is fairly common, especially as people just start applying for federal jobs and are learning how to kind of put that federal resume together and kind of get kind of narrowed in and zoned in on that bullseye. It is frustrating. It is disappointing because, again, qualified and not referred means that package is not going any further. That's the end of the road. What I would encourage people to do, though, is if you get a status of qualified and not referred, and you may feel that this is a really strong package and that you have hit all the check marks on it, never hesitate to reach out to that point of contact and on that announcement for feedback. I would say in the last few months, we have had couple of clients who have received kind of disappointing statuses and felt that their package was really strong and that they really were qualified or really strong enough to be qualified and referred, have gone back to those HR eyeballs and said, please look at this again. I really think I am qualified. Can you give me some feedback? And lo and behold, you get real answers from real human beings. And so we've been really pleased with the amount of engagement that's happened for that feedback. So can't always guarantee 100% that it happens, but you don't know until you try, right? So if you are getting a disappointing status, make sure you are reaching out and at least trying to get some feedback to know where you might be going wrong on that package. But the last status, qualified and referred, is obviously the best news. That means that your package has been found qualified by the HR and is now referred to the hiring agency. That's where the OPM HR kind of backs out. Now you have made what they call a qualified list or a qual list or a Q list. And that means you have now been placed into the federal agency for them now to decide what to do with your application package. Unfortunately, people get really excited when they find out they're qualified and referred because they're like, yes, that means I'm getting an interview. Not necessarily. Just because an applicant gets qualified and referred doesn't mean they automatically get an interview. Now the federal agency has to rack and stack those qualified candidates. They can opt to interview all, some, or none of those qualified candidates. Every agency has a little bit different method to doing that. On average, they get about 15 to 30 people on that qualified list. And when you think about that, there is no way federal agencies are going to interview each and every person that comes up on that qualified list. Can you imagine that? 15 to 30 people per position in an agency. Just no time and bandwidth to do that. This is a point too where a lot of people will ask, can you network for a federal opportunity? And the answer is yes. And this is the point in the process to do it. If you know somebody in that agency and you have what we call an internal champion, this is the time to let them know you have been found qualified and you are now on that qualification list. This is the time for them to be able to sing your praises and to talk highly about you. Does no good to do that prior to making that qualification list because you're still kind of early in the process, right? So when you make the qual list, that's a great sign. Hopefully, if your package is strong enough, if you have enough differentiation that you're one of the top candidates, you might receive that federal interview. Federal interviews, very different than private sector interviews in a few different ways. One, federal interviews are usually multiple rounds, okay? On average, about 3 rounds, usually 99.9% of the time, they're going to be panel interviews. So you do have to be used to, multiple BDIs looking at you for interviews. And in April 2022, we are still very much into Zoom Doom interviews. So not quite seeing all the back on site in-person interviews. So that means you've got to be very comfortable, very confident with your ability to work technology. Sadly, I've had some great candidates that have been very strong in their application package and getting qualified and referred. Maybe in one case even did really great on the first round of interview, but come second round, technology just wasn't their friend. It wasn't their day. And it's one of those things of, Murphy's Law, right? If it could go wrong, it did go wrong. And for some candidates, that's very difficult to recover from. And it kind of gets to be a hot mess and it gets to be kind of an I'm done. And we don't want that to happen to you. So make sure that on interview day, prior to interview day, you're doing your practice, you're doing your sound checks, you're doing your video checks, everything you can to put your best foot forward. Interviewing for federal agencies also a little bit different because obviously they're going to ask you what is referred to as a lot of behavioral based questions, and you've got to prepare for those. And you can start preparing for behavioral based questions right now today before you even put in for a federal opportunity. And what I mean by that, behavioral based questions And again, as an HR and as an interviewer for many years, I can tell you, if there's a question I want to ask, if there's a concept I need to know about you as an applicant, there's a few ways that I can ask that question of you. So let's take something really simple this evening. So if I want to know about your customer service skills, I can simply ask you, how do you handle difficult customers? And you're going to tell me how you handle difficult customers. But if I want to ask that in a behavioral based way, I'm going to frame it in this way. Describe a time when you had a difficult customer and how did you handle it? You hear the difference? So behavioral based questions ask us to go back into our memory bank and bring up a story, bring up a behavior that we have done. Behavioral based questions are based upon a psychological concept that our past behavior will predict our future behavior. So I'm going to ask you to describe a time when. Tell us about when you have. For a lot of people, that can be tricky to answer on the spot. One, because now I have to recall a memory and it may not come up as quick as I need it to. Or two, and which is more common, we recall that memory and we recall it in great detail, probably more detail than we need to. And we kind of go off on these bunny trails, right? We get very granular on the details of that memory. And that's not necessarily answering the question that the interviewers are asking. So, and I'm going to pop this in the chat. Some of you might be familiar with this. If not, highly encourage you to do some research on it. It's called the STAR method. And the STAR method stands for situation, task, action, and result. I'll say that again. Situation, task, action, result. There's all kinds of good resources out there if you just Google interview questions STAR method. So what I encourage you to do is start thinking about maybe 5 skills that you know without a shadow of a doubt you're going to use in your next opportunity, whether that be a promotion within the federal government, whether that be a first-time entry into the federal government, but 5 competencies, 5 skills you know you're going to use. Now sit down with a couple of blank Word documents and write out STAR stories for each one of those. If it's customer service, then come up with a situation, a task, an action, and a result of when you handled customer service. Write out the situation of it, what you were tasked to do, what actions you took, and what the results of those actions were. Start building some STAR stories for yourself and just kind of keeping those. We kind of call that a STAR catalog. Then obviously, as you start narrowing down to federal opportunities and announcements, then you can pick those competencies out of the announcement to do the same thing, to build those STAR stories. So again, the interview process for the federal government can go 3 rounds. So again, this is getting to be a little bit lengthy of a process. Realizing that getting into the federal government, those of you who might be getting in for the first time, you have to pack your patience and your persistence to get into the federal government. It can take a while. OPM has a hiring model of 80 days. But I will tell you that goes kind of the whole gamut of the spectrum. I've known people who have got picked up 2 weeks from applying, and I know people who it's been over a year since they applied for the position, almost to the point where they forgot they applied for the position and then they get notified that they were selected for the position. So you definitely have to pack your patience and your persistence to go through this. The interview process can kind of go on through those 3 rounds as agencies decide to go forward. Eventually, there comes a point where there will be a contingent job offer made to a candidate. It's contingent based upon a background check, not a security clearance, but a background check. Sometimes security clearance though too. So the background check is contingent. We don't go into a lot of depth on this webinar about background checks. What I will say to you is the federal government has long given up trying to hire perfect people. Now they just have to hire people like us. So best word of advice on background checks is really 2 things. Be transparent and be proactive. Transparent means just say it, just whatever it is. If there's financial difficulties, if there's something back there in the past, just make sure that you own it and just be proactive in stating how you are handling it. Again, background checks, Not much more to say to that than don't be too afraid of them. Just fill out the information as completely as you can. Then at some point after the background check is complete and satisfactory, then it is a job offer. A lot of people will ask, can I negotiate a federal job offer? And the answer is yes, but there is kind of a golden opportunity, a golden window to do that. You want to make sure that if you choose to negotiate, you ask for that negotiation between the time the background is checked and prior to you signing your contract and taking your oath. Right in there is when you need to negotiate. You cannot negotiate after you sign your contract and you take your oath. Then you're kind of signed, sealed, and delivered. So you want to make sure that if you want to negotiate anything on the offer, you do that in that time period. Common things to negotiate are start date, vacation time, and yes, ching ching, salary. Okay, so here's a slide that has the GS pay scale for 2022 without any locality pay. Now, when it comes to negotiating the salary, you can negotiate the step, not the grade. So the grade runs down the left-hand side. You cannot negotiate that. If it's advertised as a GS 11, it's a GS 11. Most offers will come in at GS whatever or grade whatever, and it is step one. But you can negotiate those steps. Another thing interesting note to note about this pay scale is this is the GS pay scale, general pay scale. It is about one of 40 different pay scales within the federal government. So I kind of get my hackles up a little bit when people call it the GS system, because it's not. It's the federal system. It just has multiple pay scales, but all the thought process is the same. You cannot negotiate the grade, but you can negotiate the steps. What negotiation and how you do that is kind of a finesse, right? It's a little bit of an art. We just can't say, well, because we want more money. Normally, we are leveraging what we've already been making with a previous employer. For example, a GS 11 step 1 is nice. However, I'm currently making closer to step 6. Or maybe it's because you have additional education or you have more years of experience, or you're just bringing something more to the table. It never hurts to ask to negotiate. I cannot tell you the magic recipe that will get you a higher step. I cannot figure out rhyme or reason of it. A lot of times it's just where the agency is over budget, where the agency is in just their philosophy and thought process at that time. What I can tell you is it never hurts to ask. Way back in the day when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I went into federal government the first time, I took a GS9 position. Again, GS9 step 1. So just go with me on the numbers there. What is it? 61.9, right? 61.9 and some change. But I was thinking, hey, I just came out of a position. I was making more than that, had just finished up a master's degree, was thinking, okay, so excuse me. So I negotiated for GS9 step 7, and you can see that 74.3. Okay. They came back with GS9 step 5. Okay. 5 is 70 and some change versus the 61 and 9. That's still some pennies, right? And I would have left those pennies on the table had I not just asked to negotiate. So it never hurts to just ask the question. Just make sure that you do have some justification and some leverage to ask for that higher scale. Okay. All right. Any questions up to that point? Any questions before we move into the second segment? Okay. Sounds like everybody's happy campers. Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about how we look at qualifying for federal opportunities. We call it the puzzle because a lot of people aren't quite sure how they find opportunities or how they promote within the federal government when it comes to their skill set. And really, there's basically 2 ways as far as your skill set: direct skills and transferable skills. And what we mean by direct skills is kind of apples to apples, oranges to oranges, okay? You might be an attorney and you're looking for an attorney opportunity within federal agencies. That's direct skills. That's apples to apples. Maybe you're a plumber. Again, oranges to oranges, right? The vast majority of people who come into the federal government come in through transferable skills, meaning that those are skills that have been used in other environments, other opportunities, but now can be used in a federal agency. I highly recommend, as a professional and from somebody as an HR, get to be really intimate with what your transferable skills are. First of all, transferable skills are not just what you've been paid to do. It's what someone's willing to pay you to do. There's a difference there. So yes, our transferable skills do come from our full-time work, but it also can come from part-time work. It can come from volunteer work. It can come from hobbies. Sometimes it comes from life skills. So you just want to make sure that you are not leaving anything out of your kind of professional portfolio of your skill set. The other thing I would say is don't be so wrapped up in titles. I can tell you as an HR, I've never hired a title. Titles don't do jobs, right? Skills do jobs. So when you're looking for opportunities, don't get so caught up on what the title is or isn't. Think about and look seriously at what the skills are, what the skills are needed. We have a little story that kind of goes perfectly with the transferable skill idea. So a few years ago, this is one of our favorite clients and customers that we had. We had a young lady here in the DMV area that owned a jewelry store. Okay, it was a family business. She'd had it for 20 plus years, but she decided to let it go, decided to sell out. So she sold out the business as a jewelry store owner, and she came to us and said, you know what, I'm still young enough and I still need some benefits and I still need my ching ching. I'd like an opportunity in the federal government. What can I do? Okay, well, if you go into usajobs.gov and go into the search bar and put in jewelry store owner, how many opportunities will come up? None, right? So that's not the place for those titles, is what you were. But does that mean she can't get a job in the federal government? Absolutely not. Think about that. 20 plus years as a jewelry store owner. She's got 20 plus years of procurement, inventory, contracting, personnel. The list goes on and on of the plethora of skills that she had after owning a business for 20 years. But it's a matter of taking those transferable skills and framing them in an opportunity that the federal government is looking for. But that means we've got to kind of understand how the jobs are arranged in the federal government. And the classification coding of the federal government is pretty straightforward. All jobs in the federal government, there's over 400 of them, are given a 4-digit series number. Okay, and that's what you see on the slide here, that 0343. Remember that number. Remember 0343. It's a management and program analyst. But in any of those those 4-digit series, they are then organized in 23 group classifications. Okay, I call them buckets. So there's 23 buckets, 23 categories of jobs in the federal government. And what's a great way to find as a starting point is understanding what buckets you would qualify for, what classification groups you would qualify for. A lot of times that qualification comes from your experience and your education, right? And understanding where that is. Of those 23 classification groupings, most human beings without any superpowers are only going to qualify for 1 to 3 of those groupings. Okay, only 1 to 3. So you've got to figure out what is your dance floor. Where are you in those groupings? So let's take a look at a list of them. Okay, so here they are. Here's the 23 groups. So for me, for example, I've got 25 years of HR experience. My bachelor's is in HR, my master's is in HR. Not a shadow of a doubt that one of my dance floors, one of my group classifications is the 0-200 grouping. That's all the human resource management. I've done a lot of training and education and curriculum development. So 1700 would also be a good grouping for me to take a look at for an opportunity. If you're IT, you can look at 2,200. If you are a business owner or have a business mind or an MBA, you might want to look in the 1,100 grouping. What's cool about these groupings is you can actually take these numbers, go to usajobs.gov, go into the search bar, and I know some people who try to find their opportunity are randomly putting in words and key phrases and just trying to come up with something, and it kind of takes them all down rabbit holes and wraps them around poles. You can actually say, okay, I have an HR background. I'm going to go into USA Jobs, and in the search bar, I'm going to put 0200 and hit return. It's going to bring up all the job titles that are in that classification grouping. Now I can go shopping on a shorter list because I know I'm going to qualify in that grouping, if that makes sense. Now, there's one group in the federal groupings, the occupational groupings of the families here, that a lot of people kind of don't give a lot of attention to because the name, and you can see it bolded on this slide. It's 0300. General, Administrative, Clerical, and Office Services Group. I can't help it that they named it kind of dorky. I mean, it just is what it is. But remember, I told you to remember that number, right? 0343, Program and Management Analyst. That's in this 0300 grouping. If you go into usajobs.gov and put in 0300 in the search bar, you're going to see all the titles. These are very good positions across agencies. A lot of times these are in support. There's some good management. There's some good project management, program analyst. All of those are in there. Good way to know if you're going to qualify in this section is to answer this question. Have you ever, to 12 months, at least 1 year specialized experience, have you ever supported or managed a program, a process, or a project? If the answer is yes, you probably qualify in the 0300. Let me say that again. Have you ever supported or managed a process, a program, or a project? Then you'll probably qualify in the 0300 grouping. Again, it is a good grouping. It's across most agencies, and there's always usually a lot of openings in that 0300 field. So do take a look at that. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit about how they're organized. But now let's talk about how if you start narrowing down opportunities and you start looking at announcements and dissecting these things called federal opportunity announcements. And it doesn't matter if you're in the federal government internally or you're coming in as an external candidate. Reading these announcements can sometimes hurt your head. Okay, but we really got to break it down into the pieces. Again, how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time, right? So you just want to look at each of these sections independently for what they are. The first section is the duties and the responsibilities. And this is really important to really pay attention to in the beginning, because this is kind of the job's mandate. This is what you're going to be doing day in and day out. And if you read the responsibility list and it just doesn't sound cool to you, and it doesn't sound like, ooh, this is what I want to do, I would pass on it in a heartbeat, because it is what you will be doing. That's what the agency wants of that position. What's interesting, though, is the agencies normally list these responsibility in order of importance to them. So as you read through a list of 10 responsibilities, you want to make sure that those top 8 you can really qualify to do. And then maybe those last couple, maybe not so much, but you want at least an 80% match on that responsibility list. You want to give yourself some room to grow, but you definitely want to make sure that you read through those responsibilities and understand them and say, yeah, this is something I want to do and I can do for that agency. The second section is probably where most people kind of get lost in the sauce, and that's the qualification section of the announcement. It's usually very wordy and can be quite intimidating, whether you're internal or external, but you just got to read it for what it is. And you've heard me mention a couple of times this evening that coming into the federal government, most positions are requiring a 1-year specialized experience, okay? 1 year, 12 months. They are very rigid on that fact. In fact, when you put in a federal resume, and if you use the resume builder in usajobs.gov, you'll note that you have to put a start and end date for all your positions. And those start and end dates are always month and year. And you also have to include how many hours per week you did that particular job. That is because they are calculating up the 12 months, 1 year specialized experience. Let's go back to that skill we talked about in the very beginning with self-assessment questionnaires. Let's talk about analytical skills. Let's say that the job announcement here in the qualifications section is requiring you to have 12 months of analytical skills, okay, research skills, whatever you want to call them. And as you build your federal resume, you know, by golly, you've been doing that right now. For the last 8 months of the job that you have right now, you've done some really cool analytical skills. And you write that in there as a star statement. And it's really crystal clear. And man, there's some good results in there and you've moved some mountains. And you put that on your federal resume and you don't mention analytical skills anywhere else on your federal resume, more times than not, you're going to be found not qualified. And the reason is because you only met it to 8 months, not 1 year specialized experience. So somewhere else on that resume, if an analytical skill is a key component, if it's a key skill listed that you must have, you've got to find another place where you can have that to at least 4 more months, where 8 plus 4 is 12 in public, right? So you've got to make sure that as you build your federal resume, notice I say build, I'm pretty adamant about that you build a federal resume to match the announcement. You don't write a federal resume. When you write a federal resume, that means I'm just kind of going bleh, and I'm putting everything I want on a federal resume. That's not the point. A federal resume needs to be very tailored and very targeted to the announcement. So many times people just they just write a federal resume, they upload it on usajobs.gov, and then they just hit submit every time they can find an opening. And then they wonder why it's not working. Because again, you're kind of casting an awful large net with just writing a federal resume and hoping it mixes with the announcement. You've got to make sure you tailor it each and every time. And so when you look at this section right here, you'll notice under specialized experience, it's quite a hefty paragraph. It's got a lot of skills in it that, again, you must meet to 12 months qualification. But notice at the end of that first paragraph, there's that big bold letter OR, or education. So this is an example of an announcement where you can qualify on experience or education alone, or a combination of the two. So you really have to read through the qualification section and make sure you're answering their call and answering what they're looking for in qualifications. And absolutely make sure that if you are qualifying, as you see on this example, by education, notice it says in big bold letters, make sure transcripts are required, which means they need to be uploaded. So as we went back to the HR eyeballs and the categories, this might be one of those uh-ohs where somebody is qualifying on education alone and they forget to upload their transcripts and they're going to be found not qualified. And it's very frustrating. So you have to read the qualification section and make sure you're answering those. Okay, the third section of, the third section of it is, and I'm sorry, I don't have it. The third section is the how you'll be evaluated section, okay? That's usually the last section of the announcement, the how you'll be evaluated section. That is very important because normally that's gonna list very clearly what competencies you're gonna need to answer in that federal resume, and it spells out the KSAs for it. So you wanna make sure that you're looking at that, how you'll be evaluated. If you build your federal resume on the qualification aspect and then you look at the how you'll be evaluated, then those should mirror together to build that federal resume. You'll, again, don't forget that how you'll be evaluated section will also have the preview to that self-assessment questionnaire, just so that you can use that kind of as a final checklist to make sure you've got everything included in that federal resume that you need, okay? So as we've kind of gone through this conversation, you probably are starting to see why federal resumes are so much meatier and so much heftier than a corporate resume. You'll see on the slide here, Going back to a corporate resume or a private company resume, on average, again, 2 pages, but it really focuses on the results. It really focuses on accomplishments and results. So if you had on a corporate resume, saved IBM $1 billion, enough said, right? That moves mountains. That's financial, that's financial increase. That's, whatever the case may be, that's an accomplishment. But on a federal resume, you're really kind of writing to 2 audiences. You're writing to that HR OPM to get qualified, but you're also writing to that hiring agency to have that differentiation so that you are one of the top candidates to be interviewed. So on a federal resume, that same IBM, saved IBM $1 billion, may read, gathered and analyzed complex financial data, use knowledge of contracting rules and regulations to identify loopholes in contracting, saving IBM $1 billion. So you can start to see that that's going to take up a lot more real estate on that resume than just saved IBM $1 billion. Thought coming from Mike here: help finding keywords and applications. You can use the word cloud generator, copy the duties and responsibility. Yeah, word art. I also use Tag Crowd, Mike. I don't know if you've ever used Tag Crowd, but kind of the same concept. And I'll put that one in here for you. Tagcrowd.com kind of does the same thing. And I'm sorry, Tag Crowd is one word there. And here's another one that I really, really like, but it comes with a public service announcement, okay? So this one will allow you to do free, about 10, I think it's 10 scans. I've had a subscription for so many years, but it's free, 10 free scans. But this one does it in a little bit more in depth than the word art or the Tag Crowd. And it's called jobscan.co. I did not mistype that. It is .co, not com. Works the same way though. And if you go on there, you'll see the free example. But you take the announcement and you take your resume and you upload both of those, and then it analyzes it. And it analyzes it at a pretty in-depth level, which I really like. It will identify hard skills, soft skills, keywords, education requirement, word count, verb count, adjective count, account. For someone who does job coaching with people with their resumes, it's really helpful because there's a lot of pride in our resumes sometimes of people like, yes, I want that on my resume. I worked hard for that. It's a major accomplishment. I want it. And I sometimes have to be the bearer of bad news of, I know it was awesome. You did great, but it's not relevant. It's not something they're looking for. And if you put something on a resume that's irrelevant, it's just taking up space. It's just wasting real estate that usually you don't want to waste. So check out jobscan.co. I think you'll find that's helpful. So again, kind of going back to the comparison of the 2 types of resumes. Private sector, pretty direct and to the point, but these federal resumes are a lot more in depth as far as explaining your skills, how you do something, and then the results of how good you are at that something. So you really are, again, writing at these 2 audiences, and that's where you're going to get that on average 5 pages. The thought that left me a while ago is I often have people who say, my federal resume is 14 pages. 14 pages doesn't mean it's relevant to that agency. So again, if you're building that federal resume with that particular announcement, particular job position in mind, then you're going to be closer to hitting that target of getting qualified and referred. So to help you out as well, we've got a little bit of a checklist for your federal resume. Federal resumes need to be in chronological format. I'm a certified resume writer, and I know there's some really cool formats out there, right? There's the functional, there's the hybrid. Then you've got all your different templates. You got your little newspaper. You put all the little colors on there, little bar graphs, nothing. And so many people think that's because it goes through an algorithm or an ATS, but it doesn't. But it just doesn't need all that fluff and stuff. It just needs good old straight facts. So chronological format from present to past. Going back on average 10 years. For some people, that's a little bit insulting because they like, I've got 20 years experience. we being federal agencies, they consider 10 years as relevant experience, okay? Anything older than that, you need to think to yourself, am I still competent in that skill? And is that experience relevant? We think of our last 10 years as our most relevant. Even federal employees that rise to the level of SES and want to write their ECQs and all of that fun package, in your ECQs, you can only use experiences that are no more than 10 years old. So again, you have to make sure that you are thinking of the most relevant and most recent experience, which in general is about 10 years. Repetition is okay on a federal resume. So going back to what I was talking about before about analytical skills and using that for 8 months on your federal resume. If you can find another space on that federal resume to put that in there for that other 4 months to have your 8 + 4 = 12, you can use that same star story. You don't have to come up with new word salad. You don't have to fluff and stuff it to make it sound any different. If it's very similar to the same skill that you did for 8 months, then just copy and paste and use that. Some people are going to want to change maybe the result numbers, maybe a percentage, maybe a count, whatever the case may be. But repetition is okay because what they want to see is that you have the 1 year specialized experience. Okay. And again, just to hit that comment one more time, as far as when you write a federal resume, you're really writing to the two audiences. You're writing to the how you do it, the skill that you do it with, and the results of that to that hiring manager. Okay. So I hope this evening's information has been helpful for you. We are Fed Job Results. We offer a whole bunch of different services to help you in the journey of federal employment. Check out our website. We have lots of resources on our website, but we'd also love to talk to you. If you have any questions or any comments on tonight's presentation, please don't hesitate to send those to us. And also, if we can just link with you and talk with you on anything that we might be able to help you on your journey, we really would appreciate it.